Good meal? Yeah. Thank you to our kitchen and our social activities team. Thank you, thank you. All right. Well, I'm very happy to have here tonight with us our Bishop Jennifer Reddall, and she has something very special to share with us tonight, her trip to Kenya, and I'll let her, of course, talk about all of that. But Bishop, it's always great to have you here, and welcome to St. Francis in the Valley.
Thank you, and it is wonderful to be here. Thank you. You always have wonderful hospitality and really good soup. This whole your definition of soup supper is not entirely Lenten, but it's delicious and wonderful. So thank you. The alcohol, the meat, the cookies. I mean, there's a few things. Anyway, last year, a group of us from the Diocese of Arizona went to Kenya to visit a friend that I had made at the Lambeth conference, which I explained. But we had our names up there from when we did this together as a presentation. So it was me, my canon to the ordinary, the Reverend Canon Anita Braden, Susan Hillman, who is a postulant for the diaconate from St. Michael and All Angels in Tucson, and Canon Clyde Coons, who I understand was here but a week ago or something. And Kathleen O'Leary, who many of you know, she's a nurse who does nursing all over the place, including at in Nogales, Sonora, at La Casa de Misericordia. And anyway, so at the Lambeth Conference, which is the once every 10 years or so conference of bishops in England, of all over the Anglican Communion, they put us in small groups for Bible study and discussion for the sort of 10 days that we were there. And this was my small group, and you can see I am the only woman. I was not actually the only woman in the group, but Archbishop Kay Goldsworth of Perth, Australia, got COVID on the second day, and so she wasn't in the picture. But within that group, there are bishops from Tanzania, Kenya, South Sudan, the Seychelles and Madagascar. He's the primate of the Indian Ocean, Hong Kong, and Kerala, India. And then that guy in the middle without the mask on, you might recognize. Who is that? The Archbishop. It's the Archbishop of Canterbury. Yes. So it was at the University of Kent, and we were all told, go to this sort of dorm room for your conversation table, and I turned the corner, and there was Justin Welby sitting there. I was like, hello, sir. And thinking, why is he here? And he's like, yes, well, I wanted to be in a group. It's like, okay. So my Lambeth conference experience changed based on the fact that Justin Welby was in my group, right? Because all of a sudden I was representing all of America, all LGBTQ people, all, anything. But it was good, and I was grateful for his attentiveness and the time he spent with our group. But the bishop that's on the far right there is Bishop John Orina Omangi from Kenya. And he and I sat together, and he is even younger than I am, but had been a bishop longer than I was. And he was the suffragan bishop from his diocese who had been sent to the place where he grew up, PC, as a suffragan bishop to plant churches there. And he was also someone who is in charge, currently and still is, of all the sort of youth ministry in the Anglican Church in Kenya. And he was someone who asked really interesting questions during all the discussions. And a lot of our discussions, we would always begin what we were saying with, in my context, and then we would describe something, and so we had deep conversations about marriage, we had conversations about wealth, we had conversations about cows. I had never been asked how many times, are there cows in your diocese? Yes. It's one of the 5 C's. How many cows are in your diocese? I have no idea. Well, I do now. There's a website you can look up all the livestock per state. There are over 1 million cows in Arizona. And the next time I go to the Lambeth conference, I'm going to be like, I have 1 million cows in my diocese. But what John asked when we were talking about interfaith relations, which was one of the Lambeth calls, John said, I know there are other faiths. What are interfaith relations? Is interfaith relations when you talk to people from other faiths and try to bring them into faith in Christ? Like, oh, no, it's the opposite of that. It's respectful dialogue between faiths. He's like, well, if that's that important, isn't that something we should learn about in our seminary studies? And the Archbishop of Canterbury is there typing. He was taking notes for our group. But so, that sort of question, he didn't know what he didn't know, but he wanted to learn. When I told a story about marrying two women in my context, and what that meant for not just the couple, but their families, it was an interracial couple, and also for all of their LGBTQ friends who weren't part of the church because they didn't feel welcome. And so, to be part of a very religious wedding, they were all talking about, what is the Episcopal Church? Are you sure we're really welcome there? You're really welcome there. And what that meant for evangelism and for sharing the good news of Jesus. John took me aside afterwards and he was like, I don't have any of this in my context. I don't know what you're talking about, but I'd like to learn more. I was like, great. I'd like to learn more about your context too. And so we struck up a friendship and began talking to each other about what the needs in his diocese were and, essentially could we come visit the next year? Because I think the unity of the Anglican communion is important. And I think that there are very formal instruments of unity in the communion, but the real thing that unifies us is relationships between people. It's relationships between dioceses where you can say, oh, I know all about the Diocese of Kisii because people from my diocese went there and they told us stories about it, and they know about the Diocese of Arizona. So anyway, so we started talking, and so in 2022 and the beginning part of 2023, let everybody know in the diocese as much as we could about it and raised some money to pay their clergy salaries. Because when I asked John what they needed, he said, well, I think my clergy would work harder if they were paid. I have also found that clergy sometimes work harder when they're paid. And so we were able to pay most of the clergy salaries for that year. The clergy salaries of the entire diocese, except for the bishop, are about $40,000 a year total. So we were able to raise, we raised like $30,000, sent it over to get the clergy paid. So by the time we arrived, we were very welcome because we were the people who paid their salaries. And so we set up a visit, and so where is Kenya? Kenya is there. Little geography lesson, because we're Americans and we're not always good at that. But where is the diocese of, and it is now an independent diocese, it became so just before we got there, Upper Southern Nyanza hyphen Kisii. The only way we could remember all the words is Upper Southern Nyanza hyphen Kisii. And so it is there. So kind of in the far western part of Kenya, it is the part of Kenya that there's been an Anglican cathedral in Kisii for, since the English were there. But I would say it sounds like, from what we learned when we were there, the Kisii people are it's kind of like the equivalent of Appalachia here. They're the people that the Kenyans, the other tribes of Kenya, and consequently the English, didn't really think were worth evangelizing, so they never did. So there was a cathedral which had been taken over by a few people once the English left, but there really weren't a lot of churches. There were maybe two in the whole state of Kisii. And so John was sent there by a bishop who had vision, and he had vision. He had grown up very poor in Kisii, to evangelize the Kisii people and to create an Anglican church in Kisii. And there was a lot of pride among the clergy in, because John is Kisii, that a Kisii bishop for the Kisii people. And this is their cathedral, and this is their mission. to equip God's people to transform society with the gospel. And their vision is a growing, caring Anglican church boldly proclaiming Christ. And I saw that, I was like, gee, that could be our mission. Like that sounds great. That's a mission that I want to be a part of, and that we can share that type of a mission. They are, as I said, a growing church. So they are church planting everywhere. In the last 5 years, they've planted I think 20 churches. And so what happens is the way that you plant a church is that it's often a layperson, and you start meeting with people and talking and meeting under a tree. And then eventually you get to a point where you get some land. Usually somebody donates the land or they buy the land. And then you erect a church made of sticks with open walls and kind of a roof. Then eventually you move on to having a mud church, and you sort of have mud walls that are over the sticks. And then what happens is then you make the sort of handmade brick church outside the mud church using the same roof, and then you knock the mud walls out of the way. But so we got to be with a lot of churches in various stages of construction and evolution. But everywhere we were met with people who were excited and eager, passionate about Jesus, and also very curious about us. Because this is not a place where Europeans and Americans go. We were in the hotel, and there was a group of, the first few days we were there was a group of 3 or 4, I think they were Australians, and they were educators. But we were the only white people there. So it's not a place that has a lot of missionaries or a lot of commerce. It's quite rural. But there were people everywhere who were incredible to be around. They have one high school, one secondary school. That's Cananita and I at the secondary school. The secondary school does the best they can. They have no library. There's no internet. But they teach, math. We were trying to engage them about sort of what they taught. They have, I would say there were probably 500 students there or so who we all got to spend time with in their big sort of administrative or their parish hall or whatever, their big room. But it was quite something. Obviously lots of children, we took a lot of selfies. There are women clergy in Kisii and in Kenya, so it was nice to be with them. There are more on their way. Met some of the people who are training for clergy to become clergy, and some of them were women too. So I asked for an itinerary. What are we going to be doing? And we received this itinerary that was kind of we'll pick you up at 9 a.m. and then we'll visit. It was kind of 3 churches a day or something. I was like, okay. And then it was but it was done by dinner time. It's that's great, because that means that at dinner we can just go back to the hotel. We can debrief with one another. We can rest. Well, what the schedule really was that 3 parishes could mean 6 or 7 churches that you visited. Because a parish could be more than one church. So we were driving from dawn till dark, and it was almost never dinner at the hotel and relax at the bar and chill out. It was go have dinner at someone's home, or go have in one case, a very formal dinner with, caterers and everything, because they wanted to honor the gifts from the guests from the United States. So I have never been so tired in my life. But we went and did our sort of visits at all the congregations. Every congregation you begin with Bwana Asifiwe, praise the Lord, and you pray together, and then everybody gets to share a little bit about who they are and what their ministry is, and then you move on to the next church and you do it all over again. Oh, and there's always singing and dancing. Got some videos later of that. I got to preach at the Sunday service at the cathedral. That was exciting for a couple reasons. It was carried on Kenyan radio. So I've now preached on Kenyan radio. Let's see if Arizona will ever catch up. And it was the day that they were raising money for the installation of Bishop John as their diocesan bishop, which was going to be a big, huge, civic event. Like, I think President Ruto of Kenya came. So it was a big deal. They needed to raise a lot of money. It was a 4-hour-long service, which is a little longer than church is for us usually. My sermon is not the reason it was 4 hours long, though it was all translated into Swahili. And we distributed Eucharist. It was a very familiar service in terms of that. And they took up 2 collections. One was the sort of regular, ordinary collection. So it was all the people from, everybody who could get to Kisii from whatever their local congregation was out there. It was all outside because there were so many people. But I did preach, and the image I used was the gospel was Peter, Peter, you're my rock, and on this rock I will build my church. So I preached about the Grand Canyon. Because, well, first of all, though, try to explain the Grand Canyon to 500 people who've never seen a picture of the Grand Canyon. Nobody out there had ever heard of the Grand Canyon. So I was describing, it's this wide and it's this deep, and there was a lot of like, ooh, But I talked about how, I feel like our churches are built one on each side of the Grand Canyon. That we're both built on rock. We're very different. And there is definitely a wide chasm in between us. But we're both built upon the rock of Christ. And I think it is the goal and the desire of God for us to know each other more fully and to be closer together. And so that was the sort of the goal and the thrust of the sermon. There were no churches that did not have a sound system. It was clear that the priority was to have sound and music rather than walls. So you get your sound system. Some of the keyboards in that were powered by like 9-volt batteries that they were like hot wiring into stuff. Bishop John came into the Anglican Church because he was walking by the cathedral, and they said, "Hey, we're looking for a musician. Can you play the keyboard?" He was like, "Do you have a keyboard?" I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Then I can learn." And so he learned how to play the keyboard, and that's how he entered the Anglican Church, which, as I pointed out, was since I began my life as a church musician, I was like, no wonder we have such rapport. It's because we're both musicians. These are the clergy of Kisii, and the catechists are the one, and the seminarians are the ones with the blue. But so lots of people, very vibrant. Some of the older and wiser clergy were just wonderful. Up here we had, what's her name now? Is it Miriam? Anyway, so the women clergy are there, and then everybody's just sort of gathered. Everyone was dressed up on their Sunday best for the Sunday service at the cathedral. It was very fun. So at the cathedral, above there, that's the procession for the offering. So the offering is, they have these like metal drop boxes basically, and put them out, and everyone came and put their money in the metal drop box. And then they processed with it to the altar. And then when the service was over, they counted it on a table in front of everybody. So a really interesting vision of financial transparency for the church. You'll also see Bishop John is playing the guitar up there. So he, when they wrote some of the music, wanted to go join in. So he grabbed an electric guitar and started playing. And I sang, as part of my sermon, I sang Montaña. It's the Mexican song where Si lloveras fe como un granito de mostaza. Because I wanted to sing something that they get into and could clap to. So we got everybody clapping to me singing in Spanish in Kisii, which was kind of cool. There's... Lots of hallelujahs.
Yeah.
The special visits here, so this was Father Daniel. So we went to visit his home. He was the oldest priest in KC. He was, I think, 95. So we visited him in his home, and we were very honored to do so. It was a very holy time. He died about 2 or 3 months later, so we were very glad that we had been able to meet him. And then in the picture below that was Bishop John's parents. So we got to visit his parents in their home. His brother is I think it's Assemblies of God pastor. So there's a lot of faith in that family. Somebody singing one time.
Keep your kids from right away.
It's only so much you have to listen to that. But so this was the secondary school we visited. A couple of little kids from the primary school they have next door came. But so it was very fun to kind of be with young people who are ready to be inspired. We also, the first day, had to make visits to the secular authorities. So we were visiting it was the assistant governor of KC. The governor was in Nairobi that day, and then visited essentially like the mayor. Everyone was very excited to meet us, very excited to have their greetings sent back to their equivalents in Arizona, and looked forward to further deputations from Arizona to come to their place, bringing hopefully money, economic opportunity, and all of those things. So we felt a little inadequate as representatives of the entire United States, but we were glad to do it. Obviously, there's no church-state barrier in Kenya, so everywhere we went, it didn't matter if it was a secular gathering. It all began with prayer. It all began with sharing faith, which I would object to in this country, but living in a place like that there felt very natural and very good. Lots of music at this time. One of us dances better than the other. This was Anita's first trip to Africa, and I cannot describe what it meant for her to be there. And everywhere she went, when she said, this is my first time on African soil, she would get teary, and so would everybody else. And everyone was so like, well, you are home now. And so it was wonderful to have her kind of experience that welcoming home.
That's wonderful.
So no walls, just So this last one was so one day was really rainy, and so as you can imagine one day was really rainy, and as you can imagine, the roads and the places we were going were not not the best. And so the car that Clyde and Susan was in could not get up the hill to go to one of the churches that we were visiting. So they were sent on to the next church to wait for us while we went up the hill and visited a church and a school, and then came back down the hill, which meant Clyde and Susan spent like 90 minutes or so at this church waiting for the rest of the people. And they said, the singing started and it kept going for 90 minutes. So they felt very welcomed, but they were also very happy to see us when we arrived. So transportation, getting there. So you see the dirt's red and clayey. Getting up for when we went to see Bishop John's family was the scariest part, where they had to actually push one of the vans up the hill while it was going, and it took the third time. I had to pull Clyde Coons back. He wanted to go help, and I was like, if you get run over here, I can't do anything about that. You're not allowed to help. But so there were lots of donkeys and stuff. You see this woman here with her like guinea fowl. Like in many African countries, right? Everybody's just like on the road. It was not cattle country, so it was like single cows and single goats. You didn't see a herd of anything. Most of the plantations there are for tea, so we got to go to a tea plantation the first night that's owned by an Anglican family. And so if you drink Lipton tea, you may be drinking tea from Kisi. So cows everywhere eating the garbage. Obviously no garbage pickup. All the commerce is happening on the street. We did spend a lot of time on the street. I have never eaten so much. So you see the top, so you're near Lake Victoria. So fish everywhere, always whole, sometimes pan-fried and sometimes wet, meaning it had sauce on it. Lots of goat, some chicken. The ugali is the big lump of dough. So that's the sort of the national, if you're in Tanzania or in Kenya, it's like a taro root blob. And it comes in brown and white, and brown is better. But we would have tea at many places, even though they had told all the churches, they've come from a long way, we're only going to stop for a few minutes, there's going to be no time to have tea. Every church served us tea, which meant you had tea and bottled water and sometimes soda. You had store-bought sliced white bread, hard-boiled eggs, and then pineapple and watermelon. 5 times a day. So that sort of balance between, I want to be a polite guest and, they brought out the store-bought white bread for the visitors and I really don't want it. But I'm going to eat it because I care about people and I don't want to let down the side. That was Anita and some sort of fruit. We finally finished that. And we went and had a half day of safari because if you'd gone that far and you didn't see any animals, that would be neglecting God's creation. So we got to see giraffes and lions, and we had a whole pride of lions. There were like 22 lions, including some cubs, and they get obviously killed earlier in the day, an antelope, and so they were eating parts of it all over. It's very exciting. We saw an ostrich. We saw all the elephants and baboons. It was quite something. It was at Masai Mara, and so got to see Maasai folks in their sort of native dress. Again, so many animals. So personal impacts on the pilgrims and that. So of the people who went on this trip, not all of us are straight. So we did not tell them ahead of time who was gay and who was straight. We just kind of wanted to be together and safe. We did tell Bishop John afterwards because we were like, I think it's important for you to know that some of the people you met are people of faith who are gay. And he said, well, we've got a long way to go on that, but I love my new friends, right? I said Ken and Anita, I think for her, this was an incredibly meaningful experience to get to go back to where her people came from at some level many, many, many generations ago. It was a healing experience, but also a challenging one. And it was also interesting to have her with us. She was the person that everybody felt comfortable talking to. So she was the person that everyone would take aside and say, like, are there really gay people in the United States? Yes. But that was it. She felt accessible, though there were some other moments where someone said in one of the rural places, we want to take a picture with the white people. And she looked, and you can come too. Couldn't figure out quite what to do with her. Female genital mutilation this is one of the things that Bishop John and I had talked about at Lambeth as well. So female genital mutilation is a traditional practice that is outlawed in Kenya, but is still very prevalent in Kisii. So 85% of girls go through that process, and the process they go through that is traditional in Kisii it's not the worst, but it's not nothing. It's a significantly debilitating experience. And so Bishop John is working to change that through education and through providing shelter for girls who run away. It is generally done over Christmas break for girls who are in their early teen years. And so they were working on building a shelter while we were there. They've now opened it and are providing a place for girls to be. They've done some of the education, but need more funding to be able to do the full education push next fall that they would like to be doing. And that is something that I am 100% on board with helping a church within Kenya work for that. Like, I don't think it's good for Americans to go places and tell them what you're doing traditionally is wrong. I think it's okay for us to support local people who are saying what we have been doing is not, it's not healthy, it's not good for women, it's not good for families, and we need to change people's minds and hearts about it. And I really appreciate that, Bishop John is doing this as a man, and he's doing these trainings particularly aimed at men. Because if you change the opinions of men about what they want their wives to look like and be like, then maybe he can make some headway in changing the practices. But it also led to some interesting experiences, because we wanted to ask, what level of FGM happens? And so we had to take his wife aside and ask her. But she was able to tell us. So we currently have a companion diocese at the Diocese of Western Mexico, and the friendship relationship with Kisii does not in any way displace that or take precedence over that. I want to be really clear about that. But it was something that I think it's important for us to show African Anglicans that we're friendly and that we care and that we want to be in relationship. So we have continued to help them out financially with the assistance of congregations and individual donors. So we have continued to send them some money for clergy salary support, not for all of it, not as much as we'd like, but we have a drop-down menu on our diocesan webpage. If you want to make a donation towards the Diocese of Kisii, we'd be most excited. John is really eager for donations. We're on WhatsApp all the time together. And they are also doing work on trying to make their diocese sustainable in the long term. Every single congregation has a strategic plan. Almost every single congregation either has or in the process of building an income-generating building that they can rent out to support their church. The cathedral is on one of the main streets in Kisii. It's right across the street from the sort of civic buildings. And so they're building a 4 or 5 story building there. That the hope is that the bottom floor will be sort of diocesan businesses like a pharmacy and a medical clinic. And everything up above that will be rented out to pay for the things like clergy salaries. The Mothers Union has a proposal for doing microcredit, microloans for women, and transportation. While we were there, it was clear that Bishop John's car was not longed for this world. You saw the pictures of the roads. You can imagine that it's not an easy place to get around. You've got to have four-wheel drive. And the churches are very far away in terms of driving time. We're trying to get Bishop John here, and I'm trying to imagine what it's going to be like for me to take him 80 miles an hour on a highway 100 miles south to Tucson, which is like, I think, bigger than his entire diocese. So, but everything was measured in terms of how many hours does it take you to drive there. And his car did, in fact, die after we were there. I'm really glad it didn't die while we were there. But so he was like, it's about $15,000 for a used four-wheel drive vehicle there. So anything we could do to contribute to that. We did get a motorbike for one of the priests, because the priests often have to go long distances to get to their congregations, and none of them have any transportation. So they just walk. So you walk for 2 or 3 hours to go to your church. And then you walk 2 or 3 hours back. And some of the clergy are young, but not all of them. But that's just how people get around in KC. You walk everywhere. And then raising money for the orphanage and the FGM shelter, which is now open, and I think he said they had about 30 people in it at the beginning, at last season. And that was one of the pictures I took on the safari. It was just awfully pretty. What questions do you guys have? Yeah.
On the high schools or secondary, boys and girls,
Yes.
and was the tuition free because it's for both? Because some secondary schools, tuition's free for males, but it isn't for females.
I did not ask that question specifically. I think there are fees, but I think they're very small, or what we would perceive as very small. It was boys and girls, and it was kind of equal numbers of boys and girls. So it wasn't something where there was like a gender differential that was obvious. But I don't know. I could ask. John. Yeah.
You said you still, do they speak English?
So
Speak English?
Bishop John speaks English. Most of the clergy speak English generally. Some better, some worse. Everyone speaks Swahili who's clergy. Within the villages, not everybody speaks Swahili. So when we were visiting some churches, he would speak in Kisi and then in Swahili and then in English. So he is very much trilingual. But yeah, it's a good question. You've got that.
Are there any, you mentioned seminaries.
Mhm.
Where are they?
So their preparation for clergy is different than ours. So there are some students who go to, so he went to Nairobi to kind of a theological college. There is not yet, I think, an extant theological college in the Diocese of Kisii, but there is some local formation of catechists and clergy. And then some clergy get sent off to like a more formal program, and they get paid different amounts based on their educational training. So if you're somebody with a theological degree, you get a higher salary than somebody who kind of was like locally farmed, basically.
Yeah, in Kenya, how many different religions are there?
In all of Kenya, many. I have no idea. Within Kisii province, the dominant religion is Assemblies of God. So it's Assemblies of God. I think there were Jehovah's Witnesses as well. We saw some Lutherans and Presbyterians. Then there's also, it's not a part that seemed to be very Islamic. But obviously there is a lot of Muslims in Kenya generally. It seemed predominantly Christian where we were. But then there are also a lot of local religion, I think. And it's a very dry place. And the Anglican Church in Kisii is dry. They do not drink alcohol. The stories we heard and the testimonies we heard from many of the people who are Anglicans and who started the churches is that I was a drunk, and then I found Jesus and gave up alcohol, and now I am an Anglican. which trying to explain the Episcopal Church to them and the whiskey Palians, so I talked to Bishop John about that because his childhood was that his parents were drunk and kind of he was abandoned and kind of had to just go make his own way. And so, but I said, well, you're like, I see people are not drinking, but I see bars everywhere, and a lot of people, we had heard about some people who were brewers. I'm like, what are they brewing? And he talked about it. He was kind of able to say, like, well, I can imagine that somebody would drink a little, but in moderation, that might be okay. But it was hard, and we had to actually in our hotel, because my experience of traveling the developing world is that there's always a hotel bar, right? And that's where you go at the end of the day, and you have your beer, and you go like, okay, what did we just do today? We had to make them open the bar for us, because we were the only people who were interested in it, and, we were able, you couldn't buy a glass of whiskey. You had to buy a small bottle of whiskey. It was very interesting. There were no shared bottles or anything, but we did get to do that a couple nights, which was nice because we needed time to just process. It was a lot to take in. Is there one more over here? All right. Are there any questions on the other topics? Because you have your bishop here. This is your chance. Stump the bishop. All right. Got one too.
Hello. I'm wondering, as I grew up in this country and influenced by all the different cultural things, what did you sense when you were in that country, in Kenya? Is it, and what I'm trying to understand is, in more recent time, there was a lot of indigenous peoples that gravitated towards communism and so forth because it was more in line with their needs and so forth. Mm-hmm. So when you go over there, I'm sure you have to be somewhat sensitive to the challenges that are there.
Absolutely, and so that's one of the interesting things. So first I'll say what I experienced in Kisii is people of amazing faith doing a lot with almost nothing. I mean, we have a lot to learn from the Diocese of Kisii, and that's my experience of any relationship with any non-American church group is that it's never the Americans have all the stuff and we want to give it to these poor people, right? When I went to Tanzania in 2007, because we had a partnership with the Diocese of New York, and Bishop Dimi Mahogolo's sentence was, if you have a choice between giving us $1,000 and spending $1,000 to come visit us, I want you to spend $1,000 to come visit us, because that will change both of us. And so, we have so much, the way they plant churches, golly, I'd love to have a bunch of y'all ready to go out there and stand under the tree and start meeting with people and then build a church with no walls and then keep going and keep going and keep going. And we're trying to get Bishop John here because I want for him to experience us and I want you all to meet him. And, we're kind of we want to take him to the Grand Canyon and show him the Grand Canyon. It's really that big. But in terms of sort of the economic things that we observe, so as I said, Kisii is it's like Appalachia, right? There's nobody there but people from Kisii. Bishop John does have a relationship with someone who was from Kisii, who we got to visit her house in Nairobi, which was quite lovely and luxurious. But we are also able to see, I think it was the Chinese One Belt, One Road initiative, where they've been investing in all these places. So there was, there's a freeway that kind of doesn't quite make it to where it needs to go. There was obvious foreign investment, but that has not led to economic development among the general people of Kenya in a way that we experienced as kind of meaningful. You know, we asked questions about that. Obviously, we were asking a very small group of people who may not be representative, but their sense was that, yeah, some foreigners come here and they pay their people to build stuff and then it doesn't work. And now we've got a half-built freeway. Oh well. Or a railway that doesn't go all the way to where it needs to go.
Because, I mean, we've been doing that for hundreds of years here. Not asking them what they do.
Right.
Telling them what they do. Instead of complaining.
Right. Well, and that's what, you know, Bishop John identified what he wants. You know, he wants help paying salaries. He wants help preventing FGM. He wants money for their transportation. It's like, okay, that's, you know, I'm not going to go in there and say, hey, what you really need. And it was interesting. Some of the stuff that we felt like, you know, like that school, right? Like, who here wouldn't want to give a book for a library, right? We could fill a library like that. But that was not one of the priorities that they identified. So we're like, okay, well then we're going to go with your priorities, not with sort of what we, you know, it was like, oh, we could bring laptops, we could do all sorts of things. But it's like, no, what we need is these. So, you know, I want to listen and honor that. Oh, okay.
What's the economic base of Kisii? Besides, I guess maybe some cattle, but is there any?
Tea, subsistence farming. We saw some bananas.
They just
Yeah, that's it.
sell it to each other, or is
Well, no, the tea plantations are selling it to, you know, to Lipton.
it exported?
Yeah, so the tea is exported. There's coffee. We saw coffee in a few places. You know, there's no coffee to drink. It's all Nescafe, but but you can see it out there. But yeah, it's all agriculture.
Okay, thank you.
So, the Diocese of Arizona is trying to do something useful.
Uh-huh.
Are there other dioceses in the United States that are interested in joining and doing what you're doing and to support these people?
So I think every diocese in the United States has a companion diocese relationship with someone somewhere. Because Kisii is new, they've only been a diocese since 2023. They do not have the level of relationship that older dioceses have. And we've run into that in a few places. So we tried to hook Bishop John up with a UTO grant, because some of the stuff he's doing is very much covered by that. But you're only allowed 3 UTO grants per province, and the Anglican Church of Kenya had already doled those out to 3 other dioceses. Trinity Wall Street is doing grants for churches and provinces that are doing exactly what Bishop John is doing in creating income-generating properties to support the church. All of their funding goes through the Anglican Church in Kenya. So Bishop John is saying, feels like I have a lot to learn about my own church. So we've been kind of stymied with hooking them up with some of the American funding in that way. And I absolutely support both Trinity Wall Street and the United Thank Offering and going through provinces rather than diocese by diocese. It's just interesting because he's like, I had never heard of these things. I'm like, well, now you know, so get in line and see if you can get your foot in the door.
Do the schools have desks?
Yeah. There were like, not desks like individual desks, like tables and benches, yeah.
What's the water situation there? I mean, we in the desert are concerned about this all the time.
It's very lush and green, and there's an infinite supply of water. Not drinkable in many cases, but there's lots of water for washing and for, you know, we were trying to describe at Lambeth conference, I'm like, well, have you ever seen the cactus that looks like this? It's like, that's where I live. But there were some of the other bishops, at Lambeth obviously also lived in arid places, so where water was a concern, but they've got plenty of water. Well, thank you so much for having me here tonight. I am grateful to Father Warren and your congregation. You guys are just wonderful, wonderful people, and thank you for keeping the faith in Southern Arizona, and I will see some of you at whatever the next thing is. Never quite sure. Hey, we brought convention down to you guys again, so volunteer to serve at convention. Thank you.